Today is October 7th, 2020. My name is Ashley Sanchez, and I'm interviewing Janine Baeza for the Latino Oral History Project / Voces of a Pandemic at the Center for Latino and Latin American Studies at Northern Illinois University. This project is in partnership with the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin. Please know, Janine, that this interview will be placed in the Northern Illinois University libraries and shared with the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas, Austin. If there's anything that you do not wish to answer or talk about, I will honor your wishes. Also, if there is something you want to talk about, please bring it up and we'll talk about it. Because we are not conducting this interview in person, I need to record you consenting, so I'll ask you a series of 6 questions. Please say, yes, I agree, no, or no, I do not agree, after each one. There are several questions we need to make sure you agree to before we go on. So the Center for Latino and Latin American Studies wishes to archive your interview along with any other photographs and other documentation at the Northern Illinois University libraries. Northern Illinois University libraries will retain copyright of the interview and any other materials you donate to the Center for Latino and Latin American Studies at Northern Illinois University. All right, so for the first question, do you give the Center for Latino and Latin American Studies consent to archive your interview and your materials at the Northern Illinois University libraries?
Yes, I agree.
Do you grant Northern Illinois University libraries right, title, and interest and copyright over the interview and any materials you provide?
Yes.
Do you agree to allow Northern Illinois University libraries to post the interview on the internet where it may be viewed by people around the world?
Yes.
Do you grant the Center for Latino and Latin American Studies consent to share your interview and your materials with the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin for your inclusion in the Voces of a Pandemic Oral History mini project, which will include posting the interview on the internet?
Yes.
All right. We have many questions in a pre-interview form that we have already filled out. We use that information from the pre-interview form to help in research. The entire form is kept in a secure Voces server at the University of Texas, Austin. Before Voces sends it to the Benson Library and the NIU libraries, we would have stripped out any contact information for yourself or family members so that will not be part of your public file. Your public file will only be accessible at the Benson Library and NIU libraries. Okay, another question. Do you wish for us to share the rest of your interview in your public file? Wait, sorry. Do you wish for us to share the rest of your interview in your public file available to researchers at the Benson and NIU libraries?
Yes.
On occasion, the Center for Latino and Latin American Studies and Voces receive requests from journalists who wish to contact our interview subjects. We only deal with legitimate news outlets. Do you give consent for us to share your phone numbers or your emails with journalists?
Yes, I agree.
Okay, so that is it for the preamble. So we can get started for the interview. So let me bring those questions up. All right. First, thank you for agreeing to do the interview, Janine. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. So the goal of the interview is to gain a greater appreciation of the experiences of the Latino community during this historic time. So we'll start off with an introduction. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself? For example, your name, how you identify, where you are from, your job overview, and what you're studying in school?
Yes. My name is Janine. I'm good with that. Janine Baeza, but you can just refer to me as Janine. I use she, her pronouns. I identify as biracial. So my father's family is from Mexico and my mom is white. I grew up in Illinois, in rural Illinois, and I currently work at University of Northern Iowa admissions. So I am the recruitment and retention coordinator. So I have a dual role with, I'm an admissions counselor, and I also help with some orientation and transition programming for students from underrepresented backgrounds. And I co-advise Unidos, which is our Hispanic Latino student union on campus.
All right, thank you.
Good.
How did you first learn about COVID-19?
Primarily from news outlets. Honestly, I didn't really understand, I guess, the severity of it. At first, like, I didn't realize how quickly it was spreading. And I feel like the media, at least what media I was reading, kind of underplayed it. I'm also like, I'll admit that I'm kind of the person who checks social media first. So yes, I have primarily, I use like the CNN app for news. That's really it. And so everything else is word of mouth, things you see on social media, that kind of stuff. So that was how I first learned about it and kind of my first perception of it.
So most of your like social media consumption is like through your phone, like not radio or TV?
Yeah, correct. I don't have cable. So yeah, that's really it. I don't really use radio or anything either. So.
And when you were first learning about COVID, it was mainly through CNN, or was there any other apps or like news outlets that you were going to?
Yeah, it was mainly through CNN. I mean, I would see on social media like articles shared from like news stations, like local news stations. AWWL is the one in Waterloo, so it's the one that's like closest to where I live, and they were sharing some articles. But yeah, I primarily, like when I was seeking out information, it was primarily from CNN.
And when you were first hearing about COVID, like, was this like in the peak of the pandemic, or like around what time was this?
I would say probably around January, February was when, like, I guess I don't really remember hearing about it in December, even though that was already a pretty big issue in some other countries at that point. But yeah, I would say probably more like February. And I think I was in it was March when I realized like how serious it was. So.
And what was your initial reaction to like hearing about COVID-19?
I don't know. I guess I was mostly confused and kind of unsure about how it would affect me. So in March, when I guess I realized how serious it was because that was when it kind of impacted me directly. So I have to travel a lot for work. And I was actually starting my spring travel. So I had just gone to a few out-of-state fairs. So I had made my way through a couple places in Illinois at that point, and I was meeting up with a couple of our other recruiters in St. Louis, Missouri. And these were like bigger fairs. That's why there were multiples of us there. So there were actually three, myself and two other admissions counselors, and we were going to a very large STEM fair for high school students in the St. Louis area. And that was when I realized, like, if any of us were to be exposed to it or contract the virus, it would be really difficult to manage because of how many people we interact with. I mean, working in recruitment, we would sometimes have multiple of these large fairs every day. So, yeah.
So how would you compare your reaction like January, February to like March, like when it like started to hit Iowa?
I think that January and February, it was a lot of like reading it on the news. It's happening to other people. This is somebody else's life. This is crazy. And end of February, March was when I was like, okay, now what? Like, I didn't really hear much from, it was like the same reactions that I was hearing from my supervisor and from their supervisor. We were all like, oh, wow, this is crazy. Like, I didn't hear anyone say, like, if this is to happen, this is the plan. There was no, like if this becomes an issue for us, this is what we will be doing. So
Mm-hmm.
no real preparation, I guess, that would have made me feel better. But this is one of those things that I guess people don't typically have to prepare for. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. So at what point and how did you realize that this would be serious?
Probably I guess when I was pulled from the road. So
Mm-hmm.
when we were doing these fairs, and starting our spring travel, all of us kind of left at once in different directions. And then there's usually like a point in the semester where we all end up back in the office on campus. And there was some reactions from other folks who don't travel. So people who work in like processing, the admin assistants who don't travel as well. And they're kind of also like, oh, these recruiters, they're going out of state. And they had said like, we don't recommend out of state travel. Like that was one of the first things that was said. And they,
Mm-hmm.
you were out of state, you weren't supposed, you were supposed to quarantine for 2 weeks. And mind you, I just was in 2 different states and then came back to Iowa and was planning to go to Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
So it was right away I realized like any contact tracing I would have to do would be nearly impossible. Like if I were to get the virus, there would be no way for me to contact those people that I met fairs, and then anyone that they had contact with, very large groups in close proximity. A lot of them were in public schools, in like their gymnasiums, their cafeterias, community centers where there's also a lot of traffic outside of that. So the contact tracing and the realization that, yeah, I was doing out of state travel, in contact with literally thousands of people every week.
Mm-hmm.
Realized like it would be so difficult to manage this in the work that I do. And so I was actually one of the first people from UNI that was, I guess, sent home to start working remotely. And then a couple days later, the reason being that I started like having, I mean, I would say like cold symptoms,
Mm-hmm.
but at that time it was like not an option to get a test.
Mm-hmm.
I called, I very quickly like called a clinic and I wasn't able to get in for a test. And
Mm-hmm.
I was just told, work from home. And people like would jokingly say that I had it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so not long after that, the rest of our recruitment staff were pulled from the office. And then, yeah. And then it very quickly was like, our whole office will be working remotely indefinitely.
Yeah, yeah, okay. So I guess that moves on a little bit to my next question. So you mentioned briefly like how your work was disrupted, but how has COVID-19 impacted you? Like you mentioned, like when it was first starting up, like you had to quarantine, you were sent home, you didn't have access to like testing, like in what other ways did it impact you?
Well, first and foremost, is my family. Can I talk about my family at all?
Yeah, yeah, I'm gonna go into talking about you, your family, and then your
Okay, so I'll talk
so
about me then first.
yeah.
So outside of work, I'm also a graduate student. So I'm getting my master's degree in philanthropy nonprofit development. However, it only impacted me in that regard a little bit. So that program is an online program as it is. So we do meet via Zoom every week. The program is really built for people who are working full time and also doing this grad program part time. So it's built for online learning. The faculty who teach it are very used to using virtual format and sort of supplementing education that way. And so I think that was a little bit easier. Our faculty, it wasn't super difficult for them to make any accommodations needed. We pretty much stayed on schedule. But yeah, I think that was probably
Mm-hmm.
the only other way it really impacted me.
Mm-hmm.
Really
You mentioned that you felt sick. Like, around what time did you feel sick, and like what were you feeling?
Yeah, so sorry, I think it was actually close to St. Patrick's Day that I was pulled from, like I came back from St. Louis, and I was gonna be in the office for a few days before going to my next trip. And so that like 3-day period, I remember it was like a Monday when I first came back, and
Mm-hmm.
I just had like sort of a raspy voice, and I was tired. I had a little bit of a dry cough. Um, Honestly, I know myself, and that's something that happens to me pretty commonly when I'm really tired.
Mm-hmm.
I have pretty bad like outdoor allergies. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes if it's like springtime and fall, like right now, I take allergy medication, but sometimes it doesn't do a great job of helping with that. And so, yeah, I think it was probably just that. I never really had severe symptoms beyond that. And I did call, like I said, just because I was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And they had said if you were traveling out of state, you were supposed to try to get tested. So I called, I tried, and they just said to stay at home and not be in contact with anybody. So
Wow, no way. Where did you try to get tested?
I called uh, the Unity Point walk-in clinics
Mm-hmm.
because I don't know, that's usually where I go.
Mm,
Doctors is Unity Point clinics. So
yeah. So this was like, sorry if I'm like echoing, but this was before, what's it called, Test Iowa was established.
probably, yeah.
Have you gone through
Yes.
Test Iowa at all?
Yes. So fast forward to, I guess, this semester, um, we started transitioning back to, so when this happened, we all were pulled eventually, probably by like early April. And we were all working remotely at that point in our office, and pretty much most people on campus were working remotely. And then sometime in July, the decision was made from our, I think it was really enrollment management, but the decision was made in admissions that we would start rotating into the office. So we would have half the staff come in on Monday, Wednesday, half on Tuesday, Thursday, and then alternating Fridays to help space us out. So it was really based on like office proximity, and then mask regulations, things like that, to help us, I guess, one, gain some sense of normality prior to students returning to campus, and then two, the decision was made that we were going to have visitors without really knowing exactly what those details would be, like safety measures, things like that. So
Mm-hmm.
they decided that we needed to be back in office and kind of in the group of things by the time we were allowing visitors to come to campus. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so in August, classes started on the 17th. I mentioned that I help with some orientation and transition programming. So here we have the Jumpstart program, which is an extended orientation program for students from underrepresented racial and ethnic minorities, as well as students who have gone through TRIO programs, AVID programs. So those programs also include students from first generation households,
Mm-hmm.
low income households as well. Also students with disabilities. So it's like a week, I'm sorry, 5 days of programming for these students. And then we also do training prior to that with our current students who serve as their, we call them pathfinders, but they're like orientation leaders,
Mm-hmm.
or that, like they're small group leaders. So during that time, I was exposed to a student, who did end up testing positive.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to then go through the process of getting tested myself and quarantining for the
Mm-hmm.
15-day period. So
Mm-hmm.
I set up an appointment through Test Iowa. I ended up not going because I also set up an appointment with our student health clinic.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing the rapid testing. So as soon as I got the appointment for rapid testing, I knew I wasn't going to do the Test Iowa one just because it's 2 or 3 days versus like 2 or 3.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
it's a lot faster on campus.
Yeah. Okay. Um, can you tell me a little bit of how COVID has impacted your family?
Yes. Well, my parents are they're both retired. My mom receives disability, like Social Security,
Mm-hmm.
because she has a vision impairment. And then my dad is retired. My sister at that time was living with my parents, and she was working at a factory. She was like doing like order processing. So
Mm-hmm.
those they make a lot of like I guess, what would you call them, like promotional materials for companies. Like they make like cups for T-Mobile and stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
water bottles, pens, things like that. And so a lot of those orders were like paused because those companies weren't working and things like that. So as a result, she was furloughed,
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't really give her a lot of information on it. So she actually thought that she had lost her job, like in that moment. She thought she was essentially like let go. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so she was furloughed. She still hasn't been able to return to her job there, and that was how she actually got health insurance. So um, she was really, I don't know, it's still kind of up in the air. She's not sure if she's gonna be able to return to that or not.
Yeah.
But a couple months she's been working like bartending jobs to get some cash, because initially the unemployment insurance was like she was making more through that than she would normally be with her regular wages at the factory.
Mm-hmm.
And then the amount was reduced because initially they were receiving the additional like $600 for every month, but that was discontinued. So now she's kind of working this like bartending job as like some supplemental income.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Yeah. And has your sister like expressed like any worries about like, because your sister has a daughter, correct? Like has she expressed anything about like working in a bar versus like like being like putting not your so to speak like your niece in danger, but does she worry about your niece's her daughter's safety at all?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, she's more likely, in my opinion, to be exposed at a bartending job versus, I mean, it's a bar and grill too, so people would be not wearing masks so they could eat and drink.
Mm-hmm.
I live in Illinois, and I'm pretty sure the policy there is that you have to be seated, and you can only remove your mask when you're eating and drinking. But that's
Mm-hmm.
basically what you would be doing at a bar and grill kind of place. So, yeah, she's more likely to be exposed there than when she's sitting at her computer in her cubicle at her other job. And they have been starting to allow furloughed employees to return in like waves at her regular place of employment, but she hasn't been, I don't think she's been contacted yet, or she has been contacted, but they haven't like followed up with any details, no dates yet.
Mm-hmm.
And she was also having trouble because my niece is 2 right now, and so she was at a daycare facility, and I think she was trying to get her into a different daycare, but it's very childcare is very expensive in the first place, and right now she doesn't have her normal income, and yeah, I think that they were kind of hesitant. She's been waitlisted at a lot of places. I think they're hesitant to give my niece a spot in a daycare because
Mm-hmm.
she doesn't know for sure if she'll have a job to return to. Um,
Mm-hmm.
they don't want to give her a spot and then have to, I guess, deal with her not being able to afford it later on down the road. So yeah, she's worried about the exposure and then also childcare side of things.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Wow. Yeah. That's yeah, that's interesting that she keeps getting waitlisted. But I guess I also want to ask, has your mom, your dad, your sister, have any of them experienced any symptoms or have they been exposed to COVID at all that you know of?
Not that I know of, not that they know of. I don't know that they have any like serious health issues either. Um, my dad has some like throat issues and he had like stomach cancer, um, probably like 10 or 15 years ago. So he has to get that kind of monitored pretty like every year. I think he goes to a specialist about that. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, and then my grandparents actually live in an assisted living facility. So um, my grandma is, I believe, 91 and my grandpa's 96.
Mhm.
They are up there. um, and my grandpa has Alzheimer's. So it's kind of difficult I think it's been really hard for them. And then my parents have been my dad's definitely been helping take care of them. So that's been stressful for them. Um, my grandpa at their assisted living facility, they were on like lockdown where they weren't able to leave their rooms for anything, or their rooms are kind of like small. I would describe them as like small apartments with like a kitchenette space. They don't normally do their cooking anyways. But their food was being brought to them instead of them going to like a dining center in their building. Um, and so they were just in their apartments. They weren't able to leave. They couldn't have any visitors. Um, so I think that they were pretty tired and definitely missing seeing. They're used to having a lot of visitors and a lot of
Mhm.
action from my dad, his siblings. They have lots of grandkids and great grandkids and even great great grandkids at this point. So
Mhm.
I think it was hard for them. And then my grandpa had he has some cancerous growths on his kidneys. And so he gets frequent bladder infections. And at his age, that can be really serious. So
Mhm.
he had issues where he's had to be hospitalized throughout the pandemic. And that was really hard on my grandma because she wasn't able to visit him. So my dad
Mhm.
had to stay with him. I think all in all, it was really difficult. And my grandpa relies a lot on my grandma being there because he has Alzheimer's. She's like the one person he really needs around him. And so when he was in the hospital, I think it was very confusing for him. So he was
Mhm.
very quiet the whole time he was there.
Yeah. And do you know if COVID has impacted any of your other family members?
Um, I don't know for sure. I mean, some of them, to be honest, a lot of them work at like a Walmart distribution center or the same sort of factory that my sister works at or worked at. Um, yeah, that's probably the majority of their jobs or like some
Mhm.
sort of retail job, if that makes sense. So
Mhm.
um, yeah, I don't know that any of them. I will say that that's kind of the biggest difference. I've been really fortunate that I've known, like even when I was working from home, that at some point I would be able to return to my job. I had my health insurance the whole time. There was a lot more like security in my mind. Like my employment was actually not something I was super worried about. It was more so like, how am I gonna adapt to do my job in an efficient way working
Mhm.
remotely? But whereas some of my family members didn't have like the same job security. So um,
Mhm.
that's kind of been the biggest difference, I guess, for us.
Yeah. And I guess I'll ask this, but I'm not sure if you really know your neighbors. Like, do you know how a COVID has impacted your neighbors in Iowa?
No, so actually, when it first started, I was living with one of my former colleagues from UNI. Um,
Mhm.
they had actually just started working at a different institution. They were planning to move with their partner closer to that institution, so they had a shorter commute to work. And then I was already planning to move as well and do an apartment in June. So I actually moved amongst the pandemic, which was an interesting experience. I have new neighbors, so I don't know how it's really impacted them. My current neighbors are actually both students, undergraduate students. So I don't know. It seems like they keep busy, but I don't really have details. Pretty
Yeah.
quiet.
Yeah.
In my old neighborhood, it was more families though, so they were home a lot, I will say.
Yeah. Okay. Um, how would you say that COVID has impacted the Latino community in Iowa?
Um, I mean, I guess my biggest experience with this would be through work.
Mm-hmm.
So working with Latinx students, a lot of them are first generation college students, and I think that it's been difficult for them to get a jump on their college search process. Being first generation students in general, but then also having the pandemic, it creates an additional barrier. Some of them live in areas where they don't have as nice of technology, as easy access to laptops, things like that, where doing remote learning, they might not know about virtual college visits or doing like these Zoom meetings that we've been doing with students. A lot of them don't know that they can still come to our campus for a visit. I think that they've been kind of struggling to get information about how to further their education and like what's to come later on.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's mostly where I've noticed a struggle. There was for a while, I'm close to Waterloo, and there's a big Tyson plant here. It's a pork plant, and there was some news articles about how it was impacting them because initially people were afraid to go to work and they were being offered more money to work during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
But then there was an outbreak, and obviously people were really scared after that. So, but yeah, and that is, they do employ at Tyson a large number of people who identify as Latinx, and also large numbers of refugee and immigrant populations as well. So some first generations as well there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Excuse me. How would you say that COVID has impacted like Cedar Falls and you and I?
Um, I can't say it's really, I've noticed a huge impact in Cedar Falls. Um, I would actually, it's interesting. I remember talking in the beginning with my parents who live um, they live in Rock Falls, Illinois,
Mm-hmm.
and which is only about 3 hours from where I live. But we would talk about the differences in mask mandates. So Illinois had a really big issue because of Chicago. So many people travel in and out of there. People travel within the state to Chicago. A lot of people commute to the city for their jobs and for school. And so they had a really big issue with that. And so they were much more strict about mask mandates, things like that earlier on. And here in Iowa, I can't say that we have that. So
Mm-hmm.
I actually remember like there being anyone regulating that until probably like July, maybe June. It was pretty later on. And I think one of the first things I saw people doing was the like One Direction stickers, like the
Mm-hmm.
one-way stickers, not the One Direction stickers, the one-way stickers like in grocery stores. Um, and then yeah, that's pretty much it. And then a lot of schools in Iowa, when this happened, did convert to online learning. In talking to students, some districts did not do a great job of making that transition. And basically students felt like for a lot of them, their semester just ended early. It was some students had the option to finish their classes, do pass fail. They had like choices. But yeah, so I don't know. That was kind of my impression of how it's impacted those students. Um, I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, but you would say like in Cedar Falls, you and I, you didn't really notice a difference?
Yeah, I mean, you and I notice a difference because I'm there a lot. So, um, do you mean in like our precautions, our day-to-day
Um,
sort of things now?
yeah, I mean, I guess I'll get into that question here soon. So,
Okay, I can stop.
I'll bring that back up
Okay,
just so you don't lose your train of thought. But
sure.
before we get to that question, I just want to know how is it how is it going out into the world now, like during COVID, and like how was that different from going out like pre-COVID, like so to speak, like in Iowa?
Um, I guess I don't know if I should answer this as like my individual perspective or a larger scale. In my world, it's pretty quiet. So, I mean, I don't really have a booming social life. To be honest with you, like normal times, um, I pretty much do the same stuff, go to work and have school. In my free time, I'm honestly usually pretty tired. Um, I guess the biggest difference is sometimes I would travel to um, Des Moines or other areas and visit friends more. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that's also, we would maybe go to like bars and restaurants and stuff. And I've been trying to, especially bars, I haven't really been at those because there's not much regulation of them, especially here in Iowa. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's, I would say my social life, little bit there was, has taken the biggest toll, but that's
Mm-hmm.
so.
Yeah. Well, how, if at all, has COVID impacted your ability to gather with family or like friends for important events?
I still haven't been able to visit my grandparents. I'm gonna try to make an appointment to see them soon. We're allowed to do 15-minute appointments right now. Out,
Wow.
it's getting kind of cold, and they're in their 90s, so they have poor circulation and they get cold very easily. So they don't really want to be outside for too long. But I haven't seen them since, I don't know, January, maybe even like
Wow.
time. Actually, I don't even know
Mm-hmm.
if it was around Christmas. I had the flu then, so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I haven't seen them in a long time, which is weird. But yeah, so that's how it's primarily impacted me from seeing them.
Mm-hmm. But you're still able to see like your family and close friends?
Yeah, I mean, my parents, at first, I wasn't visiting them at all. So I remember I turned 25 pretty quickly, and my birthday is in early April. So um, I had initially made some plans and then I canceled them because I had no idea what was going on with the world. And my friends kind of live everywhere in Iowa and Illinois, and the idea of having them come here from all their different locations and bring germs with,
Mm-hmm.
who knows what I have. I don't know. There was a lot of like what ifs with that. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we did your Zoom birthday party.
we did a Zoom birthday party. I went to a lot of Zoom birthday parties and baby showers and everything, and now it seems like those have kind of died out. So, um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Um,
What did you think of like the Zoom birthday parties, the Zoom happy hours? Like, what do you think of like as those like, as replacements for like social gatherings?
in truth, I think that we needed them in the moment, and I think the reason they're not as popular now is because we've kind of adapted to having less social interaction, and just kind of trusting in our relationships more. I think that um, some people needed that in the moment. I definitely did. I was used to seeing people a lot, and my social life was kind of like, at that time, I guess I viewed it as sort of like a de-stressor. And then with the pandemic, it became like stressful to be like in public and with large groups of people. And so doing things virtually was, I think, nice at first. Um, I would also like do a lot of Google Hangouts conversations and stuff with students to stay in touch
Mm-hmm.
with them, because I do have some students that I'm very close with. So it was definitely sad to not be able to see them. Let me back up actually, because I don't think I mentioned this, but when students had to move off campus and they had like a week to do it, I don't think I mentioned at any point.
Mm-mm.
They're supposed to be gone for spring break, and then while they were on spring break, they were told that they needed to return and remove their belongings from residence halls. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the decision to have them move out early was made pretty early on, and they received a refund or like a partial refund to their university bills. To my understanding, the amount differed. So some students were not extremely happy with that. So I think I mentioned at that point, that's another way it impacted them.
Yeah.
So many students that do live on campus, like vast majority, especially of our first year students.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I'll bring that point up again. But you mentioned briefly that you like limit now who you're able to see and socialize with, but who do you interact with now on like a regular basis, and why these people?
Primarily coworkers. And then primarily coworkers. And then the small group of students that the student organization I advise. So we're still on our rotating schedule. We've maintained that since July. And we do switch it up every month just because we're taking visits on campus. It can be really exhausting. Like, today we've also had to fill in some things too. So normally we don't give campus tours. We've been doing a lot of campus tours as admissions counselors. And I am old now, so walking around campus for an hour, 2 hours a day can be pretty exhausting, especially after giving presentations. So it can be pretty exhausting there. But yeah, so that's probably my main social interaction is with colleagues. I look forward to my days in the office. Working from home initially had its perks, and now I really hate it. So it makes me like I definitely missed seeing my work friends, and even just being in my office. I feel like I like that space so much more than I like working from home. So
Yeah, okay. So I guess now we can talk a little bit more about the university. But you mentioned you were talking about how students they had to like move out in spring break, how the decision was made around like March. But when the pandemic first happened, how did the university handle the closing?
I mean, it really depends because a lot of students, from my understanding, did not have a great experience when their classes were moved to an online format. A lot of them were not doing any kind of Zoom meeting or any kind of like actual conversation with their faculty. So it was more so turning in assignments through, we use Blackboard here, but kind of like online learning system. So yeah, so they're primarily just turning in work, and I think they had a hard time because they went from having the sort of, I don't want to say codependent learning that happens in a physical classroom, but I think that there's there's more independence. You definitely have to have some more self-control to do like your own independent study. And that's kind of what they were just told, like, or felt like they had to do. A lot of faculty, like, they prepared their classes in a way that is appropriate for the semester, and then it happened quickly, and I don't think that they really were prepared to teach online. Some professors barely even use the Blackboard learning system to show grades, like some very old school, and don't share any kind of readings or resources on this. So they're not even familiar with like navigating the page, let alone like grading assignments, like lots of assignments that are submitted through there. So it was not easy for students to transition to that kind of learning style. And then a lot of them were, I think, unhappy about having to move their things off campus. If they needed to stay on campus, that was an option for them. Some people didn't have, I guess, like a safe place to stay, or didn't feel comfortable going home. Maybe they didn't have a home to go to. So even like international students. Some of them ended up staying on campus throughout the remainder of spring term through summer term and are still here in the fall. We had students who were studying abroad who had to end their study abroad trips early and as quickly as they possibly could return to the United States before some countries went on lockdown. So,
And you mentioned that the university started closing things down in March. Did the whole campus shut down in March, or was it like, we'll do students first, then classes, and then faculty, like, or like how did the university close down?
I'm trying to remember. Sorry, I would have prepared this.
No, no, it's okay.
I could have looked through emails. I think our spring break was like right around St. Patrick's Day time. So that was like when I was like on that like Illinois, Missouri travel spree. And I remember I think that they were on spring break when I came back to campus and they were like, Janine, go home because you're coughing and you have something, like everyone's like, you have coronavirus. At the time, everyone called it coronavirus. Now it's very normal to say Kovid. So so everyone thought I had coronavirus. And then, so I think timeline of events, students left for spring break as I was coming back for travel. And then I had to start working from home. Then our whole recruitment staff started working from home as that week progressed. And then by the end of that week, students had been told, like, we are going to essentially close campus for students. So, and then I believe they didn't have like a specific, I think they were given a time slot, a suggested time slot when they wanted them to come pick up their things. And that was assigned to them based on like social distancing because they didn't want everyone to just show up on like a Saturday afternoon and start moving out. We only usually one elevator in residence halls, so that would have been a lot of people in close proximity. So, and at that time, we also didn't have, I mean, now we have, especially in our residence halls, like public areas are cleaned twice a day. In our buildings, we do deep cleans and stuff. So none of those safety measures were intact yet. People weren't really wearing masks like regularly. I don't think I saw anyone wearing them at that time. So there was really no, I guess, common way to keep everyone safe. So that was kind of the timeline now that I think back. And so I guess when students started doing online learning would have been when faculty could have also done that too. But I'm not sure, honestly. In their world, they kind of do different things than us. We're in different corners of campus for the most part. So
but you've kind of mentioned this, and if you can't answer this question, that's fine. But how did the university handle like the reopening? Well, wait, hold on. Sorry, let me ask this question before. What sorts of positions did people like hold in like the UNI community about returning to school in the fall? Like, was it like lean towards like, hey, we want to go back to on campus, or hey, like we should do online? Like, what was like the main position you really heard from people?
I primarily heard people who were like, there was mostly like two things I heard. So one, if we don't return to on-campus classes, I will not be taking classes. Like I will be waiting until spring term or until the following year, taking like a gap term or year, because they didn't want to do online learning. They did not have a good experience for the most part in the spring. And they just didn't trust that faculty had all been able to adapt their curriculum to be conducive in like this online format. And I don't know, they had been kind of burned by that before. They were worried about going through a whole semester of that. But yeah, so that was the first sort of position that I heard was like, if we don't do these classes in person, then I will not be returning this fall as a student. The second was, I don't want to waste time, basically. So it means I have to do online learning. If that means I have to do, I'm sorry if you can hear my cat running through my living room.
You're fine. You're fine.
The second was more so, if I have to do online learning, that's fine. I mostly just want to finish my degree on time or in as timely manner as possible. So those students had kind of accepted, like, we might not have as much like social life, I guess, like less student organizations, less sort of extracurricular things outside of the classroom, but they were more so focused on like the end goal. So getting their degree. Didn't really hear any students who were like, this is a terrible idea, we should not be doing this, I will not be coming back because of this. Yeah, but I did hear a lot of students once the semester actually started who would make comments about like, oh, we won't last until Labor Day. We started classes early, and we had planned out the semester where we had hopefully reduced students leaving campus, leaving the Cedar Falls area, and interacting with other areas, hopefully as much as possible. So we decided we were going to have classes on Labor Day, so they would not be getting a long weekend then. And we also shortened our semester by weeks. Normally 16 weeks, we moved it to 15. We got rid of normally we have a week-long sort of Thanksgiving break. Students return for, I think, 2 weeks, and then finals, and then it's winter break. We just got rid of that gap. And so we started early, 15 weeks, and then once we dismiss for Thanksgiving break, they will have like a winter term, so a 2-month break. And going home and bringing everything from home back here. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, some of them had sort of pessimistic ideas of what was going to happen with the semester. They didn't think that people were going to take the math mandates pretty seriously or conduct policy seriously. And I heard a lot more issues about it in the beginning, the first like 3 weeks compared to now. So.
And so you mentioned a lot like of the student perspective, and I imagine it's because you work with a bunch of students. But how did like you and your coworkers think about the reopening? Did you guys have similar views?
Some people were not happy about, not necessarily about the campus reopening for current students, but we work with prospective students. So the decision was made early on that we would be doing campus visits. What that would look like, we knew we couldn't be doing our regular open houses. Those have around like 200 people sometimes, 250. Large events like happening weekly in the fall and in the spring, sometimes twice weekly. So we knew that was off the table from the get-go. Kind of figuring out how we were going to still have students visit campus, and doing it in a way where it's safe for them and also safe for us, because we have we've decided on doing visits twice daily. We have a reduced capacity. We have a lot of, I guess, sort of policies, procedures that we try to follow to keep them safe. Tell them ahead of time that we would like them to wear masks on campus. And then we require them in all of our campus buildings. So during tours, they have to keep them on the whole time. It's best for, we have student ambassadors that help us too. Sometimes they give tours. So that definitely helps. But we had some staff who were not so thrilled about returning to campus because we don't always know where people are coming from. So some students and their families might not be taking the safety precautions so seriously. And then that puts us at risk. And as I mentioned before, contact tracing would be hard for us. Now we have it controlled more where we could definitely do it if we needed to. Hopefully we don't have to. But if we needed to, we probably could. Because we're not traveling. We were approved to do, we were given the okay to do in-state travel. We're not doing that for the most part. So it's really just been virtual visits and things like that. And then if people come to campus, that's really our only interaction with prospective students outside.
Mm-hmm. So well, now that you mentioned like what you guys are doing on campus, but how did the university handle the reopening?
Um,
Like, I guess like I guess you did kind of talk about like your plan to like shorten the semester and
mhm.
shorten break. Is there anything you would like to add on how the university handled the reopening, like in terms of like how students moved in,
Yeah.
stuff like that?
So students were given two options for move-in. So they could either sign up for a time where they could bring their things to campus, move them in, drop them off, and then leave and return like a week or two later on. Or they had the option where they could just move in early.
Mm-hmm.
Way they had to sign up for a time for this, again, to kind of monitor number of people in the hallways and in the elevators. But yeah, so those were our move-in options. Trying to think. We did orientation. Normally that's a overnight experience in June and July for students. That was moved virtually. And then we have UNI Now, which is our sort of like our welcome weekend programming. That was a mixture, sort of a hybrid. So there were some events that were virtual, some were in person. And then classes, I think this time around, we've been really fortunate compared to some institutions. Our numbers have been relatively low for positive tests, number of students who have to quarantine because they were exposed to those positive
Mm-hmm.
cases. So we do have sort of a mixture of in-person classes, hybrid classes, and then online. So hybrid's probably the most popular format right now. So that one would be like if it's a Tuesday, Thursday class, they would attend in person on Tuesday or Thursday and via Zoom the other day. So
So you mentioned that the number of cases at UNI are pretty low in terms of testing positive for COVID. Sorry. How has UNI handled students and like faculty or people who test positive? Like, what's the precaution or the protocol for that?
Yes, so we have right away, I think this was like built in probably July. They created Forward Together page. It's on at the banner at the very top of our home screen. It's been there pinned. And so that's where all the updates are. That's where you can also see we've been publishing our numbers every week, our percentage, positive percentage every week. So the number of tests distributed, the number of tests that came back positive. Those are posted every week. As well as the most updated information. You can get some like frequently asked questions there. From my experience, when I had to quarantine, we right off the bat, we were doing completely free rapid testing. We were just informed that there was a change to that. So, and I'm not 100% on this, so hopefully I don't misspeak. So my understanding, we were borrowed some sort of COVID testing, like rapid test analyzer from Test Iowa. So Iowa Department of Public Health gave us this analyzer that we got to borrow, and we weren't really sure what when they would be wanting it back. And we were sort of asked to return it very quickly. So we had free rapid testing, and then we received an email saying that we no longer have free rapid testing, definitely free 2 to 3 day testing still. And there is a rapid test option still if you want it, but it is $80. I'm not sure how that works with insurance charges. So that's why I'm like, I don't know about that. This was something that I think we found out about on Monday. I'm like not 100% sure yet. But yeah.
Does the university do anything in terms of like when a student or faculty test positive? Like, does the university provide anything for these students, or you're just like, hey, stay home contact us when you're negative and quarantined?
Yeah, so the student health center makes all the calls, which is nice. So if you've been exposed to a classmate or a professor, whatever, who has tested positive, you'll receive a phone call from them. They'll tell you that you have the option to come get tested. Otherwise, they recommend that you stay home for the 2 weeks. Then you are responsible as a student, you are responsible for contacting your faculty and letting them know that you will be missing class because you were exposed to somebody. They are familiar with this process. They knew that they would need to be understanding of that and accommodate to whatever students need if they did have to isolate or quarantine, whatever the case may be. So,
Mm-hmm.
but yes, so, and they've also been, students are socially distanced in rooms right now. They have assigned seats. So if there was somebody who tested positive in the room, they would be contacting anyone in the 6-foot proximity, so the rows around them. And so that's the assigned seats, the spacing out, that definitely helps with the contact tracing. So then they don't have to just end the whole class. The mask mandate, that's something that's a conduct policy. So students are required to wear their masks or face shields. Masks have to cover nose and mouth, and they're supposed to keep those on in all university buildings. We recommend they keep them on outside, but this is a public institution that I work for, so we technically our campus is public property. So some of them do remove their masks when walking on sidewalks as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never heard of you and I doing assigned seating. That's
It's for contact tracing. It's not
yeah.
for, I'm sure it's actually, it was probably a headache for some faculty, just an additional thing for them to have to do. But yeah, so they have assigned seats. And then, yeah, it's easier for contact tracing purposes.
Yeah.
Students, I'm trying to run through what I've already told you because there's.
No, it's okay. I have another question to ask you. Maybe
Okay, yeah,
that will help. But
sure.
okay, so you mentioned that there's like assigned seating, there's contact tracing, like the health center is doing it. There's like mask mandates, there's social distance, like there's all these protocols put in place. But do you think the plan prioritizes the health and safety of the students and faculty?
Um, the, I mean, yes. um,
Mm-hmm.
even having a mask mandate, because that was not something we had in the spring. Not a wildly, I guess, outrageous idea, but it was just not something that people thought that they'd be able to accommodate to in the spring semester in order to finish that term safely in person.
Mm-hmm.
We've also implemented policies like in our residence halls. So residents are normally, you walk down residence hall and there's doors open, there's people moving between rooms. We actually really encourage students, we ask them to keep their doors shut when they're in their rooms right now.
Mm-hmm.
Again, helps with contact tracing. Restrooms in the residence halls and on campus are cleaned twice a day.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was planned to help with safety and health protocols. I think the biggest detriment that I can see is actually more so to their mental health and their social well-being more so than their physical health.
Mm-hmm.
So
And what kind of concerns, like what, like when you say, like when you mention mental health and social well-being, like what comes to mind when thinking of students and
I've
how the
heard
campus
quite a
is
few
handling
students
that?
actually mention depression, like explicitly. They've explicitly been like, I am so depressed. I'm like, I've had I don't know, months long depressive episodes, things like that. I think that at first we were, kind of like, yay, we get to work from home, and it was exciting and new. And I know like a lot of people were trying like quarantine crafts. I did a lot of weird crafty things at first, and I spent all this money on craft supplies that I don't touch because I
Yeah.
crafts that much, right? So we all tried, I think, new things in the beginning, and then eventually, like, it was hard for us to like them, and we maybe wanted to go back to our old ways of spending our time. Like
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned, the Zoom happy hours and the Zoom birthday parties. we needed that in the moment, but eventually we reached the point where we're like, okay, this isn't fun anymore. Like we how things used to be, and we want it to go back to normal. And it's just hard because we, I think, have those experiences, and that's our idea of normal. And so for us to be forced to go in a different direction than that, I don't know, you feel like you're missing out on something and that you're not getting your best experience. And yeah, a lot of students have explicitly said like they're really struggling with depression. They're not happy right now. Um, they're very stressed from school. So yeah, I think they're kind of struggling to find the motivation to keep putting in effort for their academics right now. So that's kind of, I know like, so I co-advise one of our student organizations, and they're just exhausted. Like working with our exec board, it's really hard to watch them like very early on in the semester. So September 15th is the start of Latinx Heritage Month, and I co-advise our Hispanic Latino Student Union. So it was like right off the bat, they were expected to have a month's worth of programming planned that would still follow our COVID safety protocols, that would engage students in a safe way and a fun way. We have a way to really recruit new members. Normally we do that during summer orientation, which was online. We didn't get to do a student org fair during like our regular UNI Now and Jumpstart programming. So I don't know, there was a lot of like things up against us. And then on top of that, they're struggling socially. They're stressed with trying to accommodate to their online learning, and they're just having a hard time finding the motivation to keep trying and trying to have fun and be positive. And then they're having this pressure put on them that they need to have this programming. So we've actually kind of pulled back on what we'd be doing right now. There are some bigger events that we normally hold during Latinx Heritage Month, and we just didn't do it because I said, like, you are students too. Like, you need to put yourselves first sometimes. And this was one of those moments where, I don't know, you could just tell that they're exhausted, and it felt like work for them.
Yeah.
It felt like an unpaid internship.
Mm-hmm.
And they're doing it for students who are in the same position as them. So it's one of those things where I'm like, right now we have to take everything with grace and just be very empathetic and forward thinking. So if it's not directly helping them, then it's hurting them and adding more work.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess I want to mention briefly more of like any resources provided by the university. So how, if at all, has the university helped the community during COVID-19? Like, for example, like, have they been distributing food? Have they been accommodating students, like, technology-wise?
Yeah, so one thing that I remember them doing right off the bat in the spring term, we still had some students in the area, students who worked at our facilities. So we have like our industrial tech building on campus, our industrial technology center, and they were producing masks and face shields to distribute in the Cedar Valley. They were giving them to healthcare workers as well. So right off the bat, they were like making those as much as they could in mass production for local healthcare workers. And then also they started distributing them on campus, other places in the Cedar Valley. I also know that we have Lawther Hall on campus. So that is, it was recently renovated to be suite style living. So it's one of our upperclassmen housing options. And that one has it's rooms with individual bathrooms in there. So there's no communal bathroom in Lawther Hall, and they have central air. So we actually started using or offering up rooms in Lawther Hall to healthcare workers who needed to quarantine or isolate these early months and during the summer. So that way it was a safe option for them. They weren't like sharing a bathroom. They didn't have to open the windows as much or at all actually, because they had air conditioning. So we offered up housing for them for free, masks and personal protective equipment. So have a pantry on campus.
Yeah.
That's normally like, it's in our student union. Normally they can just come and go and students can grab whatever they need. But they started doing like packaged deliveries. Our dining services started packaging meals and delivering them to any students who were still staying on campus as well. Trying to think if there were other things.
Can you explain a little bit more of how the dining halls work? So are you saying now that people have to like pick up their food from the dining halls instead of getting to eat there?
So in the spring and summer, when students were still living on campus, there were students, international students, and then students who didn't have anywhere else to go. These folks were, they maybe had meal plans already purchased. And so we just kept that, and we used that to, instead of offering, we have like buffet style dining centers where students would normally self-serve and grab as much as they want. They touch the plates, they touch, you know, silverware, a lot of communal things. So instead of doing that, they started packaging like breakfast, lunch, and dinner for them and delivering it to their residence hall. Right now, dining centers are open for students. They have the option to get their meals delivered to them. If they are quarantining or isolating, they are getting them delivered to them, prepackaged and delivered. But otherwise, our dining centers are open. We aren't allowing any guests, however. So normally, campus visits, we would allow our prospective students and our guests to eat in the dining centers. But it's honestly just too much to track for contact tracing. It's not safe for the current students. So we can't have guests in there. Makes me sad because I love eating in our dining centers.
Yeah, same. I used to love
Everybody.
eating. I used to love eating there.
I know, I miss it.
But I guess I will also ask, like, has the university provided any like tech accommodations, like giving students laptops and stuff like that?
Yeah, so we, in the spring, I don't know. I don't know that there was any technology accommodations, to be entirely honest with you. Something that we've had for a few years now, had a large supply of laptops, Chromebooks, and other Dell laptops that we've kept in our library, and students could borrow. They could check out for the day or whatever with their student ID card with them wherever they needed to go. We had to kind of reduce the amount of the duration of that. So just because so many students were like, well, I don't have my own laptop and I want them for, I want it for my Zoom classes or my hybrid class or whatever. So now I think it's 3 hours. We have made some exceptions for students who don't have another option. Maybe they don't have a phone that has the capacity to use Zoom, whatever the case may be. I know that there have been a few exceptions. We've also had to make some changes to our computer labs as well. So normally those are definitely high contact areas. A lot of students will just stop by, print, so a lot of touching and then leaving. Very difficult to kind of monitor who's been there and any tracing from that. So I know some of the labs within residence halls have actually been, like, the computers have been removed. So they are just like workspaces. But yeah, so I know that we purchased more laptops to try and keep up with the demand. I think that at first people were really worried about it. I haven't heard anyone being super upset about the 3 hour checkout times of recent.
I think that's short. It's short.
I don't know either if they've changed it. This was also like, you know, first 2 week of class, first 2 weeks of class that I heard. So they may have adapted it to kind of meet student needs. A lot of students will still use desktops in some of our, like in like our student union or in even like our library. So I don't know. I've seen a lot of people with like just using their phones even too. So.
Interesting. Well, I guess I have one more question to add to more of like the university, how the university is handling stuff. But if needed, would you feel comfortable enough to bring up any safety concerns with the school's administration?
Yeah, yep, definitely. I've had some conversations. I actually just had a meeting last week with our provost. It was a small group of us and our provost. And And he was really just trying to gauge what are students struggling with. So he had initially selected a group of people who do a lot of retention work with students from marginalized backgrounds. So essentially people who work with our students of color on campus. And so he selected this group of people. We had a conversation about what they're struggling with, and across the board, it was really like mental health and online learning. Like I have a hard time adapting socially. It's really getting draining, and it's hard to find things that are sort of recharging me anymore. And then that, but yeah, so they've been very open to hearing our concerns. We have a committee, a mixture of current students, faculty and staff, and they have been like our steering committee throughout this process. They've been kind of the driving force. They've been giving lots of personal perspective, the perspective of their friends, colleagues, and sharing those experiences in order to make decisions. I definitely have a good relationship with administration, and I feel good about it. I think that everyone's been really gracious. Like my supervisor, we also have had some new hires in the process of this. Some other departments have really been struggling to accommodate. They've had big budget cuts, especially within like Department of Residence, because to refund students partially for their spring contracts. And so yeah, they've been struggling to keep up. We've been kind of fortunate. But yeah, so I do feel like I could approach them with concerns, questions, new ideas. They're open to all that too. It's one of those things where I'm like, you just have to address it. So
yeah, that's interesting. All right, so now we're gonna talk. I know you've brought up some of your work related just experiences, but I guess now we'll go a little bit more into depth.
Sure.
But how was it going to work before the COVID-19 crisis? Like, what would be your typical, like, let's say, week will you repeat your job title again?
Yeah, so I'm my job title is recruitment and retention coordinator. So there's like duality with my role. So I have all of the regular responsibilities of our admissions counselors. And then I also help with like orientation and transition programming, especially for our Jumpstart program. So that's our extended orientation for our students of color and students from TRIO and AVID programs. And then I also do some additional kind of like retention work and things like that. So I sit in a few committees. But yeah, so normal times I would be traveling. I'd go to a lot of fairs. I just did a virtual fair today. I will say virtual fairs seems like they're not going well for anyone based on other folks that I've talked to. And that's kind of what I mentioned earlier. I think that in general, this whole pandemic has really shined a light on how difficult the college enrollment process is. It's really shown us how many flaws there are in our system, how there are people who have clear advantages over others. In addition to that, in Iowa, we had, we had like the derecho happen in early mid-August. This was like during our orientation programming. It was really scary. It did a lot of damage to Cedar Rapids area, like bad damage, really damaged their schools too. So on top of the pandemic, some of them still right now do not have like roofs on them. I know like Marshalltown received a lot of damage too. So that already have like large populations, low income populations, large populations of people of color. So already a lot of challenges for those students there. But just in general, like financially, like it's hard to recover from that. So it's been kind of like one thing after another. So it's definitely made us realize how difficult it is for students to find their way and make the most informed college decision. Now that they don't have as many resources there to help them. So the physical presence of school counselors and even like admissions, like recruiters, like a lot of us aren't going to schools right now. A lot of colleges and universities are not visiting high schools, and we're not doing fairs. And that's where a lot of them get exposure to us, especially working at UNI. We're a mid-sized institution, so a good number of out-of-state students have not heard of us before.
Mm-hmm.
Even students in the state of Iowa have not heard of us before, like in bordering areas. So it is really important for us to get exposure in order for that initial connection to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you mentioned now
How
that,
it impacts my job. Sorry. Yeah,
yeah,
primarily, really. And then also like there's some additional things I can get into, but go ahead,
yeah,
Nash.
because you were talking about how before work you traveled a lot, you did a lot of stuff, you met with students a lot, but and then now you're going into like now you have to do like virtual fairs, virtual meetings, and how there's like a lack of connection and access with like these prospective students. But and what other ways has COVID impacted your work now? Like for example, like have you received any loss of work, received any pay cuts, like have like been well, you mentioned that you like there's no fear of being furloughed. Like
Yeah, yeah. At first I was like, I don't know what we're gonna do to work from home, because at that time when we were working, like when we were like pulled from the road, we were traveling. So like the preceding few weeks, maybe even like month, was going to be us on the road, and then follow up afterward. And so that would be like helping students with their kind of like last few, I guess, like signing up for some orientation, like wrapping up the enrollment process there. And so I wasn't really sure what that was going to look like with us working from home. So I was like a little bit concerned, but not really, because I also realized like there was still work for us to get done. And then we also had to do a lot of planning for how we were going to strategically like tackle this fall, because we knew like it became apparent pretty quickly like, okay, well, you probably won't be able to travel this fall. And so we had to kind of plan for that. And we did, I think, a lot of things that were in alignment with what other institutions were doing, like signing up for these virtual fairs. We started doing a lot of individual Zoom meetings with students, very intentional communication pieces, instead of doing so much like mass communication with students. So yeah, that allowed us to really like look through that. And then now that's what I mentioned like our budget situation. So some areas of campus had some budget cuts. So I mentioned our Department of Residence, because they had to refund students a partial refund for the spring term. I know like some of our athletics, like coaches weren't able to be contracted. Some like wellness coaches, some sort of additional roles that would be really reliant on students being present, or some of them were like new hires or new positions that had been created like very recently. And so they were, I don't know, I don't want to say fired because I'm not really sure what the term would be for it, but kind of like furloughed. So they were kept in mind for open positions elsewhere on campus, essentially. And so in our office, it was clear like we're really working on increasing first year enrollment. And so we actually had our first year, our freshman numbers increase this fall, despite everything that was happening. So we did see a boost in first year enrollment, which is why we didn't really have a budget cut too much for this fall, which is helpful because, I mean, there's always something to be paid for here. We're trying to do, right now we're writing a multicultural communication flow. So we're building very intentional pieces that are going to students and their families. We want to engage their parents and their families more, especially like at bilingual households. So we're working on a lot of translated materials in Spanish and Bosnian for sure, that are going to be sent to parents and families, I guess, guardians in the household. So trying to engage them more in the student's process. That way, I think that's kind of part of it too, like right now for first generation students, and they're really like left to discover this college process all on their own, or at least it feels like it. And so trying to engage parents and help them be part of it, so there's like more accountability, more support there. And then hopefully that will feed into them supporting their student once they're here on campus. Does that answer your question? You're muted.
Oops. I said yes, yes, it does. Like you answered my questions going down that
Okay.
list. Because you mentioned, because I was gonna ask like how have procedures changed. You touched on that. What type of protocols do you have to follow when going to work, and how have your duties shifted? So I guess can you expand a little? Because you mentioned that you have to like switch. There's like shifts on who gets to go to campus, who doesn't. You mentioned you have to like take on additional duties of like giving campus tours. But is there anything you'd add into like anything you would add, and like what type of protocols have been added and kind of duties have been shifted other than what you have explained already?
Yeah. Let me think. So we've also, I mean, we've been we added on the additional responsibility of like doing campus tours, not necessarily because we had to, because we still do have some of our ambassadors who feel comfortable giving campus tours. We do have a decent amount of them, enough where they could cover all the campus tours. But right now we don't really get a lot of interaction with students in person. So it was actually kind of like our decision. We partly wanted to do it because we would get the chance to spend an hour with the student and their family, and we might not get that chance otherwise. So we aren't taking individual appointments in person right now. So they can come to campus and they can sit in a room spaced out from us and hear from us giving a presentation. I'm sorry, I don't know what just happened to my body. Giving a presentation. And then, but we can't do an individual appointment where we're normally after like a info session, we would also allow them to come into our office and sit down with their parents and guests, and we happily will cram in as many chairs as we can into the small space, and that's not an option right now. So giving a campus tour with them is pretty safe and easy way for us to engage with the students and build that rapport with them. Yeah, I'm trying to think what else we've done. Additional policies and procedures. Well, okay, can't believe I forgot to mention this. We are a public institution, so we have to follow Board of Regent regulations normally. We actually, but one of those things that we normally have to do is require ACT for admission and scholarship purposes. So many ACT and SAT tests were canceled, postponed. It's really difficult for students to get an ACT score right now if they don't already have one. There's also a lot of students who took it maybe like their junior year. I even talked to a student who took it their sophomore year and did not score so great and was waiting to retake it, but they haven't been able to reserve a spot and actually have the test date come through. So a lot of them have been getting canceled. We have a staff member in our who their daughter is a senior in high school, and they actually ended up driving like 2.5 hours like to Des Moines area for their student to be able to take the ACT because they haven't been able to do it yet. So some institutions are still requiring it for admissions and scholarship purposes. We've been able to adapt and do it without that. So that is an additional policy that we've been able to implement. We've only gotten the 1-year test waiver, fall 21. Of course, we want to stay test optional. This has really shown us how difficult it is for students to take the ACT in general. And then on top of that, super scoring is now a thing. So we've been getting some questions about that as well. There's like sort of two groups of people that I've seen right now, right? So
wait, before you explain that, what is super scoring?
Super scoring is something that ACT offers. I actually don't think that SAT does any kind of equivalency to this. So ACT, they do super scoring, which is essentially where they would you would take the ACT more than once. They were going to do like portion tests too, where you could take, say for example, you scored low on your reading portion and you wanted to pay to take a subtest, so just the reading portion. That was supposed to be an option for students. I believe starting this fall, to my knowledge, that was like postponed. I haven't heard when that's supposed to start.
Mm-hmm.
In the spring, I remember them mentioning, they're like, yeah, we don't think that's going to be a thing by fall, and definitely isn't. So you cannot do sub tests right now. You can do where if you were able to pay and retake the ACT and you had, for example, 2 scores, they would average, they would take like your highest score. So your highest of the 2 English, your highest of the 2 math, and then reevaluate your composite score, if that makes sense. So then you would end up having hopefully a higher composite score in the end. So that is super scoring. It's a new thing that ACT is doing. We are super scoring for scholarship purposes only, not for admission. This is like a different, this is separate from the test waiver. So we were planning to not super score for admission in general. It's kind of a, I don't know how to say this. The ACT in general can be very different based on your socioeconomic status. So if you can afford to keep retaking the ACT, if you can afford to pay and retake these subtests,
have tutors.
right now. Right, exactly. It can be very, very expensive. Private preparation classes can be like $700. Sometimes people will drive like 2 hours to get to these classes too. So it can be has a close relation to your socioeconomic status. And so that's why we like that we have a test waiver right now, because in general, there's a lot of, I'm sorry, I'm like bashing ACT and this is.
No, it's okay.
Sorry, ACT, but there's a lot of research on it, and it is, working in college admissions, you see that play out. There are students who will only be taking the ACT once, and it is their district test, and whatever score they get, that is what they have. And that's it. So, and then there's the people who can afford for the private tutors, and their school district can afford to have the classes even sometimes at their high school. They don't even have to drive anywhere for them. So it just really has a lot to do with that. So that is that. So another huge influence in our job right now is that we've really been able to just make admissions decisions based on GPA and then looking at their core curriculum, so their transcript or whatever, and we've been basing it off of that. And I certainly prefer it. It works out better too if students have, I mean, some students just don't do well in standardized tests. If they have maybe an LD or maybe they don't get the same accommodations they need. I know for students who speak English as a second language, there are some accommodations, but I'm not really sure how much that actually helps them. It is a timed standardized test. So yeah, definitely better that we have the waiver option right now. So
yeah, thank you for that. So you've gone into detail on how the recruitment process has changed, the admission process has changed, but you also mentioned that you like do student programming and you do student advising. In what ways has student programming changed on campus? Like, is it organizing everything remotely? Are you guys doing anything face to face?
yeah, I'm glad you brought this up. I think I was like trying to think of it earlier, but I'm also like running on E right now. So thank you. So yes, it's been kind of difficult because especially when we were trying to plan and discuss this Latinx Heritage Month, what we wanted to do. So number one, I think that normally students who are involved on campus, they're involved, and I feel like what they're involved in is sort of like re-energizing for them. Like it recharges them. They might be like exhausted from doing homework, and then they're like, all right, I'm gonna go take a break and see all my friends from like this group for an hour or two on this night. And I think it's really nice for them to connect with that, and they look forward to that social interaction with some structure to it. But we haven't been able to really have that. So there are a good number of organizations that are not meeting at all right now. And there are also some that are meeting only via Zoom. So they were definitely encouraged through our Office of Student Life to take the precautions that they think they need to take. So for a lot of them, they were like, all right, like also know, like you need to be able to consider like contact tracing within your organization. You need to consider, is it something you can do? Like I know at our student organization, food is a huge thing. So especially within like our culture, like, you know how the people are. We love snacks, we love the food, we love to do it, and we do fundraising events too that have things to do with food. Right now, it's not great to have people with their masks off. So we've been really trying to accommodate that for one. And a lot of people were like, well, when we switched to Zoom meetings in the spring, we saw attendance go from like a packed room in our student union to like plummeting and decreasing to basically be our executive board and then maybe like 5 to 10 other members. So we saw a big drop in our attendance, and that was, I think, to be expected. People go there because they like hanging out with their friends, and it's not really the same on Zoom. And so right now we are doing, I guess I'll call it like hybrid option. So we've been trying to alternate. That was the plan initially. We're like, all right, we normally meet every other Thursday. And so our plan was to do one Thursday a month via Zoom, one in person. We did our first meeting outside, worked out pretty good. But we live in Iowa, so weather is not always our friend. And we realized pretty quickly we would have to start using larger spaces indoors and just social distancing. We've done some like game nights, but we've also been like, okay, what games can we play that involve little contact? And you know, for snacks, can we put it in a bag and pass it out to them to take home and eat later? Things like that. Making sure we bring disinfectant wipes everywhere. They are placed in every classroom, but making sure we bring wipes with us, hand sanitizer with us, things like that, precautions like that. We have had lower attendance though. So I think that what normally recharges people is like also still feels like work right now. And so I think that it's been difficult for students to engage in extracurricular things right now.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective, you know, because I don't really get to interact with undergrads anymore. I just do everything from home.
Yeah, I think that that's like the other really important part of my job right now is just like being there for them to like I've been trying to like reach out to them and take them to like get coffee or lunch or something, just like stay in touch with them, stay engaged with them. A lot of them come to our student organization because they're like, it's fun, it builds community. And then right now we're like, all right, stay in your seat and don't talk to other people. It's hard to like find the balance in safety protocols and engaging students and welcoming new members and stuff. So
Yeah, I guess I have another question to bounce off of that I didn't originally include in the interview guide. But so in your position, you work very closely with your students. Like, do you feel, well, in your opinion, has like this mentorship relationship like emerged before COVID? Like, has it changed because of COVID, or you think it's been consistent since you started the position? Does my question make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. There's a sort of mentorship relationship there before. I would say it's been like sort of strengthened with the students that I work with throughout spring term and summer and this fall. I have especially like we have a few student workers in our office, and I absolutely love seeing them. I don't have favorites, but I do have favorites, and everyone does, right? And I really enjoy working with them. So I was like so happy when I saw them when we first came back to campus this fall. It was just so weird. Like when we first started doing our rotating schedule in July, like it was like, okay, you can come back to working on campus, but you have to stay in your office. And also there's only like 10 of you in the whole office, and our office is normally packed. And so I think that relationship was really strengthened because I think previously there was some mentorship to it. You know, I was a good reference for students. I could be a good resource for them, connect them with other areas of campus. And then I think that I spoke to a lot of them either through Google Hangouts or Zoom or texting, FaceTiming them even sometimes throughout the sort of last few months, just chatting with them, hearing their stories about their home life too, how it's been impacting their families. So I think that they've it's definitely been strengthened. And now I think we're a lot closer. So I have, it's hard too, because right now we're not supposed to have people in our offices at all besides ourselves. It's supposed to be like the one place where we can take off our masks and, that's our space. But I have students that really like to spend time in my office. And so I have to be like, all right, get out. Like, find it in me to like turn them away. So
yeah. So I guess before we move on to more stuff about your like grad school experience, but what do you worry about while you're at work? Like, do you feel safe working on campus, and like, do you feel safe having these face-to-face interactions with your students?
yeah, honestly, I worry about them more than anything else, like the current students, even like high school students, of course, but the current students that I work with, um, I don't know, like I said, like the academic side of things is really difficult for them right now. So I think it's really draining. And some of them are sitting through Zoom lectures and it's not engaging at all. And they just they've kind of been forced to adapt to it. And for some of them, that's okay. And like that's their learning style, it fits that. And for others, it's been really, really difficult. So I think that's kind of been the thing that I worry about most is like, are they going to end up performing poorly academically? Is it going to hurt them in regards to their retention? Like, will they be able to return in the spring? What if spring semester looks the same? Are they going to be able to like keep finding that motivation? Are they going to want to like take another, some of them were weighing the option of taking a gap year in the first place. So are they going to go ahead and take like a gap term? I don't know. It's kind of, there's a lot of like uncertainty, and there's been a lot of uncertainty in the last several months. And so I think that that's like what's getting really hard is just like waiting and hope. So
Yeah. So I guess switching it a little bit to more like a couple more work related questions. Since the pandemic has started, have you had any concerns about your finances? About like in terms of like potentially not having a job or having a cut in pay? Because I know you mentioned that you like there was no worry about being furloughed.
yeah, so that's in my position though, right? Like there was other people on campus who were definitely worried. I mean, I guess something that I just also considered. So in working at a public institution, one of the benefits that were offered as full-time staff is tuition reimbursement. So would be reimbursed for 90% of your tuition by the university. That's something that I was supposed to get this fall, and that was actually one of the very first things that was cut.
No.
So it was considered part of our.
Mentioned that before.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it. I almost forgot it, but yes. So tuition reimbursement, and right now I'm paying grad school tuition completely out of pocket. So that's kind of not fun. But to be, like I mentioned, I don't really have a great social life right now. Previously, I would spend money, going out to eat quite often with my friends or whatever. So been doing less of that. So it's balanced out a little bit, but I also haven't been able to travel anywhere. So normally I spend a lot of money without realizing it on travel expenses. So yeah, so even when I'm traveling for work, sometimes I get a little crazy with the spending. So yeah, I would say that that's been kind of a financial strain. I haven't been worried about losing my job personally or anything like that. I have been weighing the possibility though, like I was on like a 3-year plan in my mind when I started working at UNI. And so I'm in my 3rd year right now. So I'm like, okay, normally I would be like gearing up to start looking at new jobs. And right now that's like my biggest concern with moving. So I grew up in Illinois. I would like to move back. I want to be closer to home, closer to my family. I also miss living in a more urban area. Cedar Falls is great, but I'm just ready to go somewhere else. I really want to move to Chicago. So yeah, finding a job right now, I don't know that's going to be great, especially in Chicago. I know that they're really struggling. So and I want to stay in higher ed. So I have my work cut out if I want to stay on that plan, that 3-year plan. So really been, I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, because I asked like do you have any concerns about finances? And you mentioned that you have the concern of having to pay tuition out of pocket now because of the policy changes, and then the potential availability of like finding a new job. I guess, can you expand a little on like your worries about the job market now because of the pandemic?
Yeah, so a lot of institutions actually did have budget cuts, especially if I want to stay in admissions. And I like the role that I'm in right now. I don't know if I'm going to look at admissions positions or if I'm going to look more at retention based, like advising positions. I'm kind of open, so it depends on what feels like a right fit. So, but a lot of institutions did have like round across the table, round the table, we have budget cuts. We were kind of fortunate in that it was more isolated to kind of a few areas on campus. But yeah, so they might not be hiring. So there's a lot of institutions that were planning to open up positions and hire new faculty and staff for summer, for this fall. And they didn't get they had to like postpone that search. They didn't get the funding to the salary line or whatever to start the position. So we haven't had to do that so far. We've been able to hire new staff. We even just hired a new director in admissions. So we've been able to move forward with that planning. So I'm just kind of worried that being that I'm lower on the poll, that I'm not going to be, I'm more expendable. I'm not so expendable at UNI. I've kind of built myself here. I feel more security here in our office. I don't feel like there's going to be cuts, but looking at other institutions, if I were to move there and things were to take a turn for the worse, I would be the newest person. Would I have the same security? Probably not. It's like, do I want to move to another state, start a new job only to lose it? I don't think so. Chicago was shut down too. They've been really struggling with their job market. So
yeah. So I guess talking a little bit about family and like job security, have you ever like financially contributed to your family, or does your family like ever lean on you for like financial contributions? And has COVID impacted your ability to do that?
I would say, especially when my niece was younger, I would help contribute, mostly like possessions and stuff. My sister had WIC, and she had like, I don't know, I'm sorry, Medicare, Medicaid, whichever one like you can get when you're younger. She had that insurance, and so my niece has that as well. And then I don't know, so I would kind of help by like buying clothes, things like that. I even bought like a bunch of diapers and stuff for her before. But they've had some like state aid and federal aid to help with that process. My parents also, like, they're at home, so they can help with supplement like childcare sometimes if they're available. But yeah, no, it worked out okay because my parents both get Social Security because they're not able to work anymore. So I don't think that they received any kind of cuts or anything to that during the pandemic. So.
Okay. So I guess now moving on a little more about your grad school experience. So in the beginning you mentioned that your current grad program is like it's based on distant learning. It's based on like online learning.
Yes.
Did COVID disrupt your classes at all?
No. I remember that, the class that we were in at the time, it was a law class, and so it was a nonprofit law, and so it was taught by an attorney, and she did a really good job of just like asking us like, if you need an extension for things, I'll give it to you. I think she even decided to just cancel one of our assignments, just drop it completely, just because she knew that the vast majority of people in my program work in nonprofit organizations. I technically work at a nonprofit institution as well. But yeah, so they were really struggling to adapt because nonprofits are already, they already have to do a lot to be relevant and keep up with donors and maintain all their funding. So they were really struggling, I think, to adapt in their work environment. I had a little more job security, I think, than some of them did. So yeah, but there was really no like pause or anything in our courses other than that. So everyone's been pretty understanding of that.
Yeah. Are there any challenges that you see related to like online learning or hybrid learning? So I know before you mentioned it's like based on like student
Yeah.
how autonomous they are, how much self-efficacy they have, you know, like how much internal motivation they have to do online classes.
I'm sorry, I'm like getting uncomfortable. So I look like I'm not relaxing weird.
That's okay.
And then you were talking about my experience, right? Like how I
Yeah.
kind
Like,
of
because I asked, sorry, I'm just like,
okay.
I just asked you like 10 things at once. But
No.
I said, like, I was trying to ask, like, are there any related challenges to online learning other than the ones you previously mentioned before that you'd like to add?
I mean, same ones, yeah. I think that but this is how my program's built. So the faculty are really used to teaching in this format. We meet on Mondays via Zoom for our 3 hours a week. As it is, a lot of them will offer additional like office hours, virtual office hours, but they usually just do them by appointment as it is. I mean, it's a cohort program. My cohort has like 15 people in it, I want to say, maybe 16. So it's pretty small. And it's, I don't know, I think that we've been able to move through things pretty well together. So there hasn't really been, I'm so sorry, a huge disruption.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that I've like adapted. I knew what I was getting myself into. I actually had talked to the program director before starting. I had taken, I believe, I had taken a few online courses that were completely online, where it's just like very much reliant on you know, watching recorded lectures or doing the course readings, studying independently, and then reaching out when you need help instead of having somebody just like physically present to offer it and just give it to you. So I wasn't really a huge fan of that type of learning, but having, I think, the weekly meetings, even though it's virtual, I think that that definitely helps because I just know, you know, they remind us every week of what assignments are coming up and where we should be at with our like final paper progress. So, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I guess you answered my other question, like, what benefits do you see? And I was gonna ask how you had to adjust to remote learning, but I guess you didn't have to, but
Yeah.
and you have mentioned how the undergrads have to adjust, but is there anything you would add on like how the university adjusted to online learning?
I've mostly heard like, I don't think I've heard anybody say it's been super great. I will say that. So
Mm-hmm.
people have had worse experiences than others. Um, I mean, especially coming into this fall, faculty knew they would need to be prepared to do at least some of their courses online. Even if it was a course that was normally taught in person, it has been for decades, however they structure it. They knew they would have to adapt. And so I think that the vast majority of them did put that effort into preparing their classes for this fall. But of course, there's going to be people who, I mentioned, some people didn't even really use our like online grading, like to show grades that way. Some of them still used like old fashioned grade books, like a notebook.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a big jump for them.
Yeah. I guess I'll also ask, does the university offer any like training for like teachers and faculty and staff on like how to do remote work?
Yeah, I know they did a lot of work, especially like departmentally. Like I know department heads were working with faculty within their areas because, yeah, they did a lot of like workshops and preparing and all kinds of training for them. So yeah, they definitely did try. I also don't know all the details. I don't teach any courses, so I don't want to speak about that too much. But
Did you have to do any like remote online training stuff?
not really.
No.
I think we did some like basic stuff, like because right off the bat, we were one of the first schools that I know of that were using Calendly, which is now very commonly used. So we were using Calendly is like a free service that links to your Google Calendar, and basically you can like share a link, and people would be able to schedule an appointment on your Google Calendar that way. Out organizations. So it works well for admissions. So I've seen a lot of schools pick it up now. But yeah, that was something that we transitioned to right away. So we immediately were like, okay, we have to figure out Zoom, because if we're going to be offering these individual Zoom meetings, which to be honest, I was not something I was familiar with. Some of our international recruiters were like, oh, this is easy. This is like what we're used to. So that was a pretty, I think, a much easier transition for them there. But for us, it was like, I mean, it happened pretty quickly too. It was like maybe an hour long. Like, this is how you set up your Zoom to be a little more personalized and professional looking. That's it.
Yeah. I guess this is my final question before we go into the conclusion questions. Have you or your coworkers experienced any like issues with trying to do remote work, like with technology, just any issues in general?
I believe we did have one Zoom bomb experience. So I remember this was like I saw it trending like a lot in probably like April or May maybe, where people would like jump into random Zoom links, and sometimes they were classes, sometimes they were like meetings. And so yeah, that's why we had the training early on, where it was like, the purpose of having a waiting room and not allowing students to rename themselves and like take control and share their screen, because people were getting Zoom bombed and like inappropriate things were being shared in like college lectures and stuff. I even saw that there was like, it was maybe NAACP or like some other social justice organization that was focused on, it was like, I think it was specifically like a Black Lives Matter sort of social justice group, and they were targeted by people who were racists. So we definitely right off the bat were like, we need to have basic knowledge of how to prevent that from happening. And there's like very simple features on Zoom to do that. So we also had to kind of adjust our virtual visits and stuff to make sure that we weren't sharing Zoom links with random people as well. We started having people like moderating, like having 2 counselors on when we would do virtual visits, where we would like present, so we could have somebody monitoring the waiting room and messaging students, answering their questions and stuff. So simple things like that. It didn't really take us too long to kind of brainstorm how we could do that better.
Yeah, that's interesting, because when I think about you and your coworkers, most of you guys are pretty young, very adaptable to technology.
Yeah. We also, I guess I didn't really consider this either, social media. We've definitely like upped our social media game hard. So we actually have one of our student workers who just spends their time making like graphics for our Instagram account, things to put on our Facebook, things like that. So yeah, very helpful, trying to engage students more. Even like today we did like, we're starting admissions counselor like profiles on our Instagram. So yeah, the use of social media has been very helpful as well.
Yeah. All right. So I'm gonna go into the conclusion questions now. But is there anything else that you'd like to share with me about your experiences with COVID-19 that I have not asked you?
I can't think of anything right now. I feel like I've been talking for too long. So
No, I appreciate it. You've been very insightful, which I appreciate. All right, so these are my last questions for you. How has Iowa handled the pandemic?
Iowa as a whole, I mean, I kind of mentioned it earlier, like I would talk to my parents in Illinois, and very quickly, and like even I'm thinking like Walmart, right? Like the
Walmart,
store Walmart. And so I remember we would compare like Walmart safety measures. And so I remember my dad saying very quickly at their Walmart, they would have to wear masks and they would have their temperatures taken at the door, and they had a capacity. This was a lawless land here in Iowa, so just let us do whatever. The first thing I saw them doing was like the stickers that I mentioned earlier on the floor that was like, please like follow them throughout the store, and the 6 feet apart stickers that people often did not follow, prior to them even requiring masks. So kind of counterproductive, I guess, but only somewhat productive measures. So I don't know. And then also Test Iowa, a lot of people didn't really know about it. So I'm still not sure actually to this day. I think the closest Test Iowa site is the Waterloo Mall, like by the driver station, which from here is about a 15-minute drive.
I have to drive to Cedar Rapids for Test Iowa. There's not one here in West Liberty, Iowa
Yeah,
City.
so I would say Test Iowa stations are pretty scarce. And then you have to so you would have to have transportation for the most part, especially from where you're at. Like I could probably catch a bus, public transportation if I needed to.
You can't walk up. It has to be drive-through. They're drive-through testing. From what I know.
I think you're correct. That would make sense. I don't think you can walk up. So there's another issue right there. You also have to provide like, I mean, I did like a post interview, I guess, like, and they send you surveys. Like I still get these COVID-19 task force emails, I think almost daily from them, which makes me only want to unsubscribe. But I feel bad doing that. So but it's frustrating the amount that I get. But yeah, and then I did a very long interview about contact tracing and stuff, my process. So I don't know. I think Iowa's been a little messy, especially because there was never a mask mandate made statewide. So like I mentioned earlier, we have a conduct policy on campus where we can enforce students to keep them on in the classrooms. If they refuse, class has to end for the day. They literally have to say, because Joey here said that it was his right, he gets to do this, we actually have to end class because we can't be here without him on wearing it. So we have a conduct policy. When they're outside, it's public property, so we can't enforce that. So there was actually some, I don't want to call it bad publicity because I don't know, something that's out of our control, but there were students playing basketball without masks on campus outside. Again, campus is public property. We can't do anything. People were calling the police about it, and they were frustrated that campus police were saying like, we can't do anything, but we can't do anything. There was no legislation passed, no policy, public policies that would enforce that. So all we could do is create a student conduct policy. And that, unfortunately, that also relies a lot on like students monitoring and policing other students. I read a couple articles about how that was pretty similar at other institutions as well. So it's kind of frustrating for students to have to like monitor their peers. And then I don't want to say like tattletale, but report them. So
is there anything you would like to see implemented in Iowa in terms of how we'll handle the pandemic in the future?
I mean, a mask mandate would have been great, like a long time ago. And then there was a few counties where the governor had closed the bars for a little while. I think it lasted like 2 weeks maybe, because numbers were increasing at counties where public institutions were at. So in our county, closer to Iowa State and then University of Iowa as well, the numbers were going up, and people attributed that to college students and other young adults attending bars and then passing it there. So there was like bars closing at, I think that if they didn't serve food, they had to close at like 5 or 6 p.m. or something like that. And then liquor was to be served after, I want to say like 10 o'clock. So, but again, that only lasted like 2 weeks. So I don't know. Again, I think that would be, I know, and that's what's hard too, is because I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but I mean, quite a few college students work like bartending and restaurant jobs, serving jobs. retail jobs, and a lot of those places have closed or reduced operations. So students have lost their jobs there as well. That's kind of another issue. So I would like to see some more policy around that, especially like moving forward. If we want to see more change happen in the future, I don't understand why we would just keep doing the same thing and expect a different outcome. Need to like do something different.
Yes, I agree. All right, my last question for you. How has the federal government handled the pandemic, and would you change anything in how it's been handled?
I mean, we received a stimulus check, which was nice in the moment.
I didn't receive one.
Some people, let me rephrase, some people,
Because I'm a college student.
yeah, some people received a stimulus check. I was fortunate in that I did. However, there were plenty of people who could have used a second one or more financial support. I don't think that enough policy was set into play to like prevent the virus from spreading in the beginning, which obviously just created a ripple effect of like businesses having to close down. And so initial things were very messy, very, very messy. Now, I don't know if I have the answers to these things. I'm and same situation, right? Like we can't.
Yeah, this is all your opinion, whatever.
Okay, well, in my opinion, I think it's stupid to keep doing the same thing and expect a different outcome. You have to implement some sort of new, something new into the environment, right? Something new to make a change and set something different into motion. So, yeah, I don't know. I think just sitting around and downplaying things and being like, well, I had it and it wasn't so bad. It's still a problem, right? Like there's still people who can get very sick from it. It's still an issue. We still don't have, you know, a vaccination. It hasn't been mass produced and distributed. Quite a few people were like, oh, spring semester, things will be fine because everyone will have access to this vaccine. Well, it is October, so our semester ends in November 25th. So I don't know. I would like to see it, right? In an ideal world, sure, but I don't know that will happen. So
yes,
the answers for this, but
yes. Well, thank you, Janine, for your insight. Thank you for your time. I know this was a long interview, but I appreciate your openness. Do you have any questions for me before I let you go?
I don't think so. If you need further clarification though on anything that I said, because I know that I rambled at several parts and I'm also getting very tired. So I don't know if I made sense at every point, but if you need clarification, just let me know and I'd be happy to follow up with you.
Of course. And I will be connecting with you to get in contact with more of your Latinx coworkers.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you, Ashley.
All right, thank you.
All right,
Hold
bye.
on. I need to end the recording.